Well, first of all, in my world, there's no shoulds, okay?
There are no
shoulds.
There's no shoulds, yeah.
So I would never say to anybody, you should, because that itself is intrusive. So the question is whether it's helpful or not to delve into the past depends on what's happening with that individual. And if some of the effects of trauma, as we said earlier, is that the wounds of the past keep showing up in the present. So from my point of view, it's not so much about delving into the past and dwelling on the past, but on dealing with how the past is showing up in the present. What a psychologist friend of mine, Peter Levine, calls the tyranny of the past, where the past dominates my present reactions. It doesn't matter how many times I go back and think about my childhood story. That's not going to help me. What I have to deal with is what's happening in me right now at this very second, which is a shadow of the past. So thinking about it is not going to be of much help. What's going to help is to deal with the emotions that are arising now as a result of what happened and how those emotions affect my life in the present moment. So it's not about the past, it's about the present.
Yeah, so it's really about the choices we have now.
Exactly, what's available to us now.
Yeah, what's available to us now, because I feel like we didn't have a choice in the past because we were either too young or too incapable of making a choice.
Exactly.
But the choices that happen right now can transform everything.
It is possible. Some people do make themselves into victims. They kind of identify with the victim role. All this stuff happened to me, and therefore I cannot do such and such, or I'm hurt and I'll never get over it. It's possible to identify with the victim role. It's even possible to identify with the survivor role. I'm a survivor. Well, no, that's not who you are. You survived, but who you are is much greater than that particular experience, and who you are is always much greater than your suffering.
Yeah.
And so it is possible for some people to identify with the suffering in the past to such a degree that they stop moving forward.
Yes. I think you've just raised a really important component of all of this. On a deeper level is that what we identify with, right? Even earlier you were talking about people who would be raised in this hypothetical village we were talking about, but even through research, they won't identify with the values of a capitalist society.
Yeah.
Identification, you just said people could identify as a victim, they could identify as a survivor. What is a healthy identification?
There isn't one.
Right.
Because if you look at, again, the meaning of words, and I just find words fascinating.
Same, yeah, absolutely.
Identification comes from a Latin word, idem, which means the same, and facere, to make. As soon as I make myself the same as something, like if I identify with my role as a doctor, I immediately limit myself. If you identify with your experience as a monk, and I don't mean not to learn from it or to grow from it, but if you identify with it, that's what I am. You've now narrowed yourself. So there's no healthy identification. If I identify myself with a state or a nation, I could be loyal to that state or nation. I could love that state or nation or any group. But if you identify with it, such as you have no independent existence, you've limited yourself already.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, is there healthy identification? Not really.
Isn't the challenge though that I think all of us are pursuing some sort of identification? Like that seems to be a massive human need. Like I support this football club, or I'm a fan of this band, or I'm a member of this car club, or I go to this shopping grocery store. Like I feel like we're all wanting to be members. Like that seems to be like a human need of wanting to be a member of a community, wanting to identify with something.
It is a human need to belong, but can we belong without identifying to the point that we have no independent perspective? In other words, can we be authentic? And I talk a lot about this tension between authenticity, being ourselves, and attachment, which is belonging. Ideally, we can both be authentic and belong.
Yeah, I like
but that kind of identification often leads to suffering. I mean, that's what the Buddhists call attachment, isn't it? And I'll give you an example. So you mentioned the sports team. So you wouldn't know this, but in the 1950s, the Hungarian soccer team was the best in the world. We never lost.
I love soccer and I did not know.
No. We went to Britain and we beat Britain 6-3 in Wembley Stadium. The first time that it was a...
Sorry, Brit fans.
Yeah, sorry about Bears, and it was a huge national holiday in Hungary. And a small country goes to mighty Britain and beats them at their own game, And the next year, the whole country was joyful, and it was still one of the great memories of my childhood. The next year, we're in the World Championships, and we're the heavy favorites because we haven't lost for years. And we meet the Germans in the final, and we lose 3-2.
Yeah.
National tragedy. I'm telling you, it still hurts. It's just a football game played on the pitch by 22 guys in 1954. So what? But when there's this over-identification, then that itself brings suffering. Now, yes, you can support your team. In Vancouver, British Columbia, where I live, it's a very peaceful place. But the Vancouver Canucks, which is the local hockey team, made it to the Stanley Cup Finals and they lost. There were riots in the streets. Why? Because people had over-identified. You can enjoy the team and be a sports fan, but the identification that your joy or satisfaction depends on whether your team loses or wins, well, why? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I love that answer for many reasons, because I've had to go through the grief of letting go of past selves, adopting new selves, and then having to realize that none of those were me as my identification. So as you rightly said, when I took off the garbs of a monk, when I took off my robes, it was really tough because there was a part of my identity, especially at a young age, that was attached even to the outer covering. And I had to realize that I had to extract the inner beliefs and leave the outer covering behind, and the outer name and what that meant. And even in my career today, like I've had to let go. And even now, I don't even know how to identify in one sense. Whenever, I'm sure you feel this to some degree in your work as well. It's like whenever they say like, oh, when you're on TV and they want to put like your title, and they'll be like, Jay, what's your title? I'm like, I'm more defined by my purpose than my profession. Like, what I do for people and the service I want to offer in the world is far more important to me than author or podcaster or former monk, or like those things don't really define me.
Well, I get that totally. What I'm thinking about is you're telling me when you left those monk's robes, we talked about the crab, didn't we? With the hard shell. To grow, you have to let go of the shell at some point. So each of those moltings represent the point of growth, but at the time it's difficult. So when I left family practice to go and work with a highly addicted population in Vancouver, and it was a loss of identity for a while. I was a bit disoriented for a few days because all these people, these families that had relied on me to be the kind of the linchpin of their health, and all these people that had come to me and trust me, and who I would see in the office, and all of a sudden I left that. And now who am I all of a sudden? So I totally understand that. Now the reality is that I'm so grateful that I did. What then I got to experience in the next realm of work helped to further define my purpose in life and taught me so much about myself and human beings. But at the time, it was difficult. Letting go of that identification was difficult. And there was really that sense of, well, if I'm not that, then what am I? This is what happens when we identify with roles.
Yeah, if anyone's listening and wants to have a go at figuring out what your subconscious answer is, ask one of your friends, ask them, and then get them to ask you, who are you?
Yeah.
And your answer to that question, 99% of the time when you ask someone, who are you? They'll say, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I'm a Brit, I'm an American, always the answer is on such a material level.
Well, as one spiritual teacher said, I think, unless I'm making this up, but I think they said that the problem is not knowing who you are. The problem is thinking that you know who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it, that the things that are true safety feel unsafe to the mind.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued by that because you've studied the mind, you've studied addiction, you've studied healing, you've studied trauma. Why is it that we seek certainty and stability when you earlier also said that the only time we experience growth is the opposite, when we're vulnerable? Why is it that we're so addicted to things staying the same or things not changing? Like that seems to be a core human addiction.
Well, a therapist once said to me that it has to do with the nature of the mind that you're referring to. A therapist once said to me that if your parents didn't know how to hold you, you develop the mind you hold yourself with. So you find safety in this mind that you created. And so the human mind, the ordinary egoic human mind, is basically a defensive structure. It's, in significant ways, it's a response to pain. That's not all it is, but in significant ways, it's a response to pain. It's afraid of pain, and it's designed to keep you from experiencing pain. So it's worried, and it's anxious, and it's defensive. So when it comes to change and vulnerability, the mind wants to defend against it. And so it comes out of fear, which comes out of childhood experience, where the pain that you had wasn't held. And therefore, you develop these mind structures to keep you from experiencing it. And I mean, one of them clearly is addiction. And, Keith Richards, the world's most famous former heroin addict, the Rolling Stone guitarist, said about addiction, for example, his heroin use, that the contortions you go through just not to be yourself for a few hours. Now, why would somebody not want to be themselves? Because it hurts so much at some point to be yourself. And then the mind comes in and tries to protect you from that pain of being yourself, with its ideas and its beliefs and its certainties and its endless desires and its artificial needs. And it's afraid to let go. Because if I let go, I'll be a helpless child again. So the mind largely is a defensive structure, and then often will react that way.
That defensive structure obviously sets us up for so much. What is happening inside that makes two people react completely differently to the same thing? Right? You could have a parent that's a drug addict, and one of the children goes, I'm never going to have drugs ever again because I saw what it did to my parents. And the other person actually imitates the behavior and goes down the same path. What have you found or seen that at a young age creates that different journey?
Well, the first thing to say is that no two children have the same two parents, and no two children have the same childhoods, even though they grew up in the same biological family. Because first of all, one of them came along at a different time. So they had a different set of experiences. There's the birth order, that affects how children experience the parents. Then there's degrees of sensitivities. So some people are born more sensitive than others. Sensitive, again, comes from the Latin word sensire, to feel. So the more sensitive we are, the more we feel. Given the right environment, a nourishing, supportive, grounded environment, that sensitive child just becomes an intuitive, a creator, an artist, an actor, a leader. But in an environment where there's pain, that sensitive child suffers more pain than the less sensitive one. So he'll have more of a reason to escape from the pain. It's not so much that he imitates the behavior of the adult, it's that he takes the same escape route. And addictions are always, in my view at least, an escape route from pain. So it has to do with birth order, with family circumstances, degrees of sensitivity. Having said that, the other child who doesn't become an addict hasn't necessarily escaped. They just may have developed different coping mechanisms. They might have become one of these people that are going to make a big success in the world out of themselves, and they're never going to fail, and they have to be the best, and they're going to suffer too. They just might suffer in a different way.
That sensitivity you're talking about is probably one of the biggest questions I get asked right now, and I want to ask it to you because I feel your experience could offer some real light on it. I feel people are experiencing so much sensitivity and empathy that they just can't stand the world we live in today.
There are people like that.
And I hear this again and again, where it's like, whether it's the political climate or the economic climate or their family have addictions or friends, like everything that you talk about in the book. And people feel, this can't be my home. Like this is not the place I want to live in. And so just as you were saying earlier, that someone may have the thought, I don't want to be myself or feel like myself for a few hours. People say, well, this doesn't feel like the world I want to live in. I'm sure you've met many people who've felt that way, seen that way, or maybe even talked that way.
Have I met people? Let me tell you something.
Or worked with people.
I had an experience with ketamine a few years ago. This is a ketamine training for healers, and I was injected with ketamine. It was taking me where it was taking me, and all of a sudden I found myself screaming, "I hate the world." That was good that it came out of me. So I totally know what you're talking. I'm just saying that personally, I personally know what you're talking about. Okay, so here's the thing. I think a lot of that has to do with that. First of all, the world is getting more stressed. It's getting more split. Everybody sees that. It's getting more hostile in a lot of ways. It's getting more less welcoming and more dangerous, more alienating. On the one hand, on the other hand, we're more and more alone with it. Isolation and loneliness are rising. So if people experience pain and change and stress or even danger communally, it's bearable. But when we're alone with it, it becomes less and less bearable. And so one of the major factors driving, I think, the sensitivity that you're describing is just how alone people feel, which is how not how we're meant to be. So that the capitalist values of aggressive, individualistic, ruthless greed and competition against everybody else, that doesn't reflect human needs or even human nature, not as we evolved. But the more the world gets that way, and the more isolated we become, the more vulnerable we are to be hurt by the world that we live in. And I think that's what people are talking about.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me, I was really fortunate that the clients I coach and the people that I work with, I got to experience a lot of individuals who were vulnerable with me, but they experienced being lonely and successful. And lonely success didn't bring happiness. And I know that one thing that me and my wife are always talking about, especially because we're in a country where we don't have any family, we had to start from scratch in our friendship, work, and everything was...
I heard you say in a podcast how important family is to your wife, for example.
For my wife, it's huge. Like her personal family is like everything to her. Like that's her greatest value. But here we had to build our family.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we constantly do is we try and make a concerted effort in order to cultivate and curate our community in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating to me because, again, perception comes in where most people say to me, well, LA is a very shallow place. Like LA is a very fake place. And I'll say, well, I found some of my best friends here and incredible human beings. How much does that perception of a place or a space or a person actually also make us more lonely? Because I find sometimes that loneliness is created by perception. Like if we're scared of being vulnerable with someone, it's hard that someone will be vulnerable with us, right? So what do we need to do in order to build deeper relationships for healing and in this path that you're suggesting?
Well, first of all, it occurs to me that loneliness is always perception. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone is just a fact and that we can embrace and make decisions about. Loneliness has got an emotional charge to it. And that's very much a matter of perception. You can be alone and not be lonely. And you can be surrounded by all kinds of people and be completely lonely. So that depends, how open am I? How vulnerable am I really willing to be? What defenses have I erected around myself to protect myself that keeps me from really contacting other people? So I think we unwittingly generate loneliness. There's also something else that happens, and you referred to this earlier. You talked about elders. So in our society, we don't talk about elders. We talk about the elderly. It's not the same. In our society that defines people so much in terms of their economic value, we tend to discard people that are not perceived as having economic value either as producers or consumers. So this society generates a lot of loneliness just because it's materialistic values. And in other functioning cultures, elders are not only they're respected, but they have a purpose. They have the wisdom, they have the experience, they have the vision, they have let go of a lot of the attachments that youth invariably engages with. So they have a lot to offer. So loneliness is also created in a society that has a very rigid and limited set of values.
Yeah, I love the change in the language again of the elders and the elderly. And I always go back to that time in my life because it gave me so much. But growing up around people that were the same age, younger, older,
Yeah.
and elder gave you so many different visions of life. And when I look back at my childhood or my young adulthood, I was constantly surrounded by people that were older than me, younger than me, much older than me, and wiser than me.
Yeah.
And being able to have everyone's vantage point
Yes.
created a beautiful 360-degree picture of life.
Yes.
But most of today, we're only seeing 1 degree. If you spend time with only people your age, you're getting a very limited viewpoint of life.